You know, it's great. Our boy, Olivier Brett. He's been just eyes deep in Montreal press conferences this morning ahead of the kickoff. Ollie, welcome. Thank you for joining us. What's the mood like? I mean, it's before kickoff. Everyone's happy, right? Everything's great. That's what you're doing.
Yeah, especially during a training camp. But being eyes deep in CF Montreal pressers is better than eyes deep in snow, which is what I realized when I landed from Orlando yesterday. So, yeah, the mood is great until you have to shove the car out from the back, but everything's fine.
Did you get any side-eye from your wife, Sonia, that she was having to deal with all of that? And your daughter as well, while you were gone enjoying the palm trees in the warm weather?
I've avoided her. I haven't spoken to her. I haven't seen her. I'm just hoping she'll forget because we're going on holidays soon enough. So I think the beach will kind of make her forget about the whole thing.
All right, here we are then, ahead of a new season. Last season, 8th in the East. Some departures. Cockroach gone, of course. Joseph Martinez, the big name, leaves. Victor Wanyama, can't believe it. Can't believe he's left. I mean, I thought he was there.
Surprise.
A lifer, I thought. He'd be there forever. Raheem Edwards is out. But in comes some interesting names. Giacomo Vrioni is, I guess, the big one, I suppose. Although Prince Owusu is literally a big one. Like, he's quite the unit. Yeah. Is Montreal better now than they were this time last year, or just a different look?
They're much better equipped to do what Laurent Courtois wants to do, because as much as Joseph Martinez was a lifeline at the end of the year, if he wasn't there, CF Montreal just don't make the playoffs. It's as simple as that, because he had a knock-on effect on other players, one of which is Caden Clark, who had a great end to the season. Having said that, it's a football team that was always stuck defending on the back foot. And they were basically having to survive the other team attacking them rather than trying to control things higher up the pitch the second they lose the ball. Obviously, you can't always go on an all-out press, but when the opportunity is there and you want to go, Joseph Martinez isn't your guy. And I think Prince Owusu is a guy who kind of fits that mold. I was talking to a few players in Orlando this week, and they were telling me that their pressing in preseason at times was just way better, even though they haven't kicked the ball in MLS yet in 2025. It was way better than their pressing last year. And obviously the reflex you have, they had their worst defensive record since joining MLS in 2012. Your reflex is always to look at the goalkeeper, to look at the three guys at the back. But the reality is they just weren't good enough at defending on the front foot to be able to protect those guys. So I think that's going to be a massive change this season. Then the question is, who's going to score those goals that Joseph Martinez scored? Obviously, Caden Clark is still full of confidence after last year and his stint with the national team this winter. But Prince Owusu has an awful lot of responsibilities on his shoulder, considering Giacomo Vrioni hasn't really trained. Well, he hasn't trained with the team yet. That should only come as of next week. So I don't think we'll see him for a good few weeks.
What do you think?
Ollie. I appreciate that, Ollie, as a defender, and Jimmy, and I know Dubs as well. Defending starts from the top, always does.
Absolutely.
We at the back get to, we get caned and blamed for all the goals conceded, but there you go.
It's true though, Forrest. Sorry, Ollie, I was just going to say that Sirois, I thought maybe unfairly, I don't think he had his best year. I think it paled in comparison to how he did in 2023 when he was first handed that number one job. But oftentimes, I think the blame was put on his shoulders, sometimes fairly, but oftentimes I think unfairly, because the players in front of him weren't doing the job.
Defending deeper, if you're organized and you've got somebody in front of you who's closing down players, making sure that out wide the crosses don't come in with players being able to lift their head, pick a player out. I mean, that just becomes too easy, and there becomes, you get to a situation where it's catastrophic defending. Like, you always feel you're putting fires out. Whereas you look at the best defensive teams, it doesn't mean always sitting back, but there's a calmness around or about them when they are in or around their training, their box. And I think that's something that was lacking with CF Montreal last year. And imagine, Samuel Piette had a really, really good season plugging holes in front of the back line. If he hadn't had the season he had last year, I mean, it would have been an absolute disaster. So he's still there with a new contract now. It was just announced a few hours ago. So I suppose he'll be buzzing. And a defensive unit that knows that up front, you've got people able to close down a lot better than last year.
Yeah. Ollie, do you think it's, I mean, is it fair to say, I mean, you've got 7 road games in a row.
Yeah.
So is it fair to say you probably won't really see the true Montreal team play come April when they eventually get home? And you think now, you'd probably think that the manager's got to play a different kind of tactic, different style of play, because you know you're on the road for 7 matches. And you'd like to play attacking football, but it's difficult, as we all know, playing on the road and playing your own brand of football.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you're starting in Atlanta with Almiron back. The place is going to be absolutely jam-packed. I think tactically they're aware of that. My big, and this is at the beginning of training camp when we knew Prince Owusu was coming in and Vrioni was coming in. Even before knowing Vrioni was nowhere near ready to start the season, my feeling was that you were better off with Prince Owusu, because when you're on the road, I think you need that bigger target who maybe doesn't want to go in behind as much as Vrioni, but he can try and be that presence off which Duke and Caden Clark and maybe Fabian Herbers can bounce off and pick up pieces off. That piece of the equation is just out now anyway, because Vrioni isn't available. So I think that would have been a big decision to make. Do you go with Vrioni or do you go with Owusu? That decision has been made now for Laurent Courtois, as far as I'm concerned. But there was a shift in 2022. It started in 2020, actually, under Thierry Henry, because when Henry came in, Wilfried Nancy was his assistant. And one of the first conversations they had was Nancy telling Henry, we need to get away from this perception that the second we put a foot on the plane in Montreal to go and play an away game, we're basically fighting for 1 point. We've abdicated 2 of those points. And he made a real conscious effort. 2020 obviously was the pandemic, but in 2021 and especially 2022, when they had a record season, he managed to change the mindset of that team. I think if they get back to that, and that's where those 7 games on the road are an opportunity, right? If you pick up results in, 4 or 5 of those matches, even though they're draws, I think you get a massive confidence boost ahead of their return to Montreal in April. But obviously, it's a massive task playing 7 games on the bounce to start the season away from home.
It really is. And how important do you think it is just getting that first point on the board? Because we've seen in years past teams that do end up playing a lot of road games at the beginning of the season. They lose that first match, lose the second one, the third, then panic mode starts setting in because you're looking at the table now, seeing the rest of the teams picking up points. Mm-hmm. You haven't picked it. How important is it for them to get something out of this Atlanta game?
I wouldn't put too much pressure on it, because last year they were off to a flying start, and then what happened? They were 3-1 up away, 8 minutes left in Chicago. Raheem Edwards gets sent off, and all of a sudden they lose the game 4-3 on the weirdest goal, one of the weirdest goals I've ever seen in MLS. Kellen Acosta from the center circle basically shanks it, was sending it out into touch, catches wind, goes over Jonathan Sirois' head, and they took basically 3 months to get back from that. So I think it's more, but I do believe if you had a more engaged Victor Wanyama, maybe he's the kind of presence that can calm everybody down, both at the end of that game, because he wasn't used, and in the following week, saying, lads, like, we had what we needed to start the season. Let's just come back to those basics. So I wouldn't put too much pressure on that specific game. Having said that, I was speaking to George Campbell, who's an ex-Atlanta player, and I was asking him, what it was going to be like to not only be involved in that game, have family present, but also in front of a packed house, because he wasn't part of the great years. He was still with the academy when Martinez and Almiron were running the show. And he spoke about silencing the crowd. And I think that if I was Laurent Courtois, even if you lose that game, let's say 2-1, but you manage to keep the crowd doubting, quiet, because it's going to be huge, 60 or 70,000 crowd, even that, I think, is something you could hang your hat off ahead of the following 6 away games.
Sorry, Dubs, I thought you were jumping in there. Okay, I've got to talk about the name that is just, when you hear it in TFC circles, you see the tears start welling up in their eyes. And it's, another one that may have got away. We don't know just yet, and that's Jaquille Marshall-Rutty. We heard the brass at TFC basically saying last week, man, that was a terrible mistake. We can't keep doing this. How was he in pre-season? Do you think he gets a starting spot straight away, or is he still a project?
I think both. I would give him a starting spot, and he's still a project. I think, and I don't know what you guys. Obviously, I've seen a good lot of Toronto games over the last few years, but I don't know. Maybe going back to his academy days, I think he's got everything to get in that final position. The delivery in the box is where I think he can make a huge leap forward. And having guys like Vrioni and having guys like Owusu, I think maybe facilitates that a bit. Tom Pearce on the other side, I don't know if Pearce or Dante Seeley, who just came in from FC Dallas, will start. But if it's Pearce, I had a chat with him this week and I was asking him, because I mean, he's absolutely phenomenal at crossing the ball. And I said, what's the big difference now that you don't have Joseph Martinez and you have bigger targets? He wasn't so much about, like, Joseph Martinez was incredible to serve, but you had to adjust your crossing to him. Whereas now you can practically just say, I'll lift my head, I'll make sure I put a decent ball in a decent part of the box, and they'll be able to look after it. And I think that might be a huge advantage for Jaquille Marshall-Rutty, who sometimes gets to the final third in a bit of a panic, because that's his great quality. He's going in very fast. He wants to take on the defender one-on-one, but then you might need to take half a second to just compose yourself and cross a better ball. If he manages to do that, I think it's going to be like, we could get to the end of the year and say, what a pick that was from Montreal, from Toronto.
Ollie, before you were talking about kind of the engagement of a guy like a Victor Wanyama. And when you look at the targeted additions that CF Montreal have made in the offseason, especially center back, a guy like Jalen Neal, and then up front, across that front line, I think it bodes well for them, but it also bodes well for the depth of the squad. And then from Courtois' perspective, keeping everybody engaged for the duration of the season. So when you look at last year and how well they began, Courtois talked about treating that almost like a mini season, and they had some success, but very little success kind of continuing that. And as you mentioned, recovering from that shambolic performance in Chicago and how it all went sideways on them. So this year, 7 games on the road, it's going to be challenging. But I think if you look kind of long-term, the macro approach of the season, they look like they're better set up to have success stretched all the way across 2025, don't they?
100%. And last year, I totally understand this is not criticism at all, but I understand why he spoke of a mini championship to start the season. Having said that, he wants just one season, not 3 seasons, because that's what he had last year. He had this mini season to start the year. He had, he went across the desert basically for a few months after that, and they finished really, really strong with Caden Clark coming in, a few other additions, and especially Joseph Martinez having a great end to 2024. So I think you want to be able to have that depth. I was at training the other day. I think it was Tuesday. I don't remember. I've been covering the club for 14 seasons now. It's 14 starting. I don't remember a training session like that. They were close to 2.5 hours going at it, and there was no just stopping and explaining or set pieces. The low energy kind of stuff. It was just full on. Tackles were flying. You just feel there's that competition, because you do feel every spot is doubled. And last year, when you finished the season, it was great, but you can't go on for 34 games the way Laurent Courtois managed this, and he had to. But the way he managed this team at the end of the year, where you essentially had a starting 11 and 2, 3, maybe 4 guys. You didn't have a squad. You had a starting 11. It was basically like the 60s and 70s, everybody, and you won't go above number 15. So I think that's a big, big difference this year. That's positive. Having said that, I think Laurent Courtois is going to have an awful lot more man management for just across the board. He had a good bit to do last year with personalities like Kokara and Joseph Martinez, but now justifying who starts, who doesn't, who gets playing time, that's going to be a big challenge for him this season.
Do you know, when you look at a lot of teams that are successful, they always have a striker that's scoring goals, that's in form. You look at Prince Owusu, and he's not really a prolific goal scorer. He does find himself in good areas, but what's it going to take this season to get him into double figures?
Just crosses. I'm coming back to basics, and I know it's not a huge part of the modern game, but I find Tom Pearce's left foot, Tom Pearce basically, and maybe Jaquille as well, they represent the big challenge for CF Montreal this year, because all the guys who are quote unquote defenders, because that's how they're using them as wing backs, the guys they're all footballers. They're all guys who want to play. Now, Can they defend? Are they able to win the ball back properly? That's Marco Donadel, ex-Impact player who came in as assistant to Laurent Courtois, who's in charge of doing that. And I'm hearing a lot of good stuff. Things seem to be a lot clearer this year than they were last year in terms of the defensive duties. Then when you go up front, I think down the middle, Caden Clark is your man. Natan Saliba, I just saw him. He's on a different level now. Physically, he's stronger. You just feel that people are starting to talk about his leadership. So I'm kind of confident that himself, Samuel Piet, I think Fabian Herbers is a great addition. Caden Clark, though, is an X factor. Now, I don't know if these talks of conversations about his negotiation, his contract, is that going to affect things? Is it actually happening? I don't know. But if you manage to put that aside, himself down the middle, and especially guys on the wing, if they manage to play off Owusu properly in terms of Caden Clark, and the guys on the wing can just keep it simple, get into dangerous areas, put it in the box. You know what? If you play him consistently, I think he can. I think he can get 10. Maybe he can get 11. But obviously, you need to make sure you get in those positions, and that means winning the ball a lot quicker than you did last year.
You mentioned Clark's contract, and I know there are rumors around Saliba all off season as well. Is there a Chouanier scenario brewing here again?
For which? For Saliba or for
either or? I mean,
no. For Saliba, I don't think so. I think they're eventually going to get an offer. Honestly, if he takes the step, I think he's able to take this year. Everybody understands that before the World Cup next year, if not before the end of the year, he's gone, and everybody's going to be chuffed. I think it's more a question of knowing for how much. Then is he going to go to Europe? For Caden Clark now, I don't have any privileged information on that, but that's a really interesting one, because I spoke to him this week, and I spoke to him about the $50,000 in allocation money that was traded. He's insulted by that. He said to me, they sent me somewhere else to die, basically. And those are strong words, right? He was back home. It really didn't work out. Now he comes to Montreal, who give him a great opportunity. He takes off. He's with the national team. And now and again, I don't know what's going on, but if he's asking for more money straight away, I would understand CF Montreal saying, you know what, let's talk in July. Put your money where your mouth is, just bet on yourself. And if in July you're still flying like you were last year, let's go, we'll talk, and it'll mean the world to everybody. Now, is it a bit premature? Yeah, I think so. Having said that, he's the one guy that had a spark that you knew was coming back this year, because Joseph Martinez, I think, in hindsight, was never coming back. So it's an interesting discussion, but it's very different from when Mathieu Chouanier was there. Why? Because sporting director Olivier Renard was not present, and it wasn't, among other people, Joey Saputo's kids who are partly negotiating those contracts, or at least Lucas Saputo. Corey Ray has a role to play in that as well. So I'm not expecting things to go sideways, but is Caden Clark just jumping the gun a bit? Listen, you're always entitled to ask. The worst thing that can happen is you get a no, but I think it's a bit early to ask for more.
Do you think a guy like Natan Saliba, or Natan, as Jesse Marsh likes to refer to him as, do you think that taste that he got and being capped with the national team, playing a little bit of a prominent role in impressing Jesse Marsh in camp, that was like an extra little nudge to a guy who's already intrinsically motivated? He's going to be on that upward trajectory regardless in terms of the quality and also the leadership, but maybe that was just a little bit that he needed to kind of reach further and to really push his own ceiling?
I don't think he needed that to push his own ceiling, but I think it's validation, right? Anytime you take a step, for example, 2023 was his first season in the league. He had a great few games to begin with. Then he had a slump. I think that was a great bit of validation by the club to stick with him, because other players were just sent back to the reserves or sent back on the bench, and we never saw them again after having a few bad games. They stuck with him, and I think those are the nuggets when you're a young player, where you go, okay, they actually believe in me as much as I believe in myself. So let's just put any doubt to the side and let's go forward. But I think it's more in terms of, I mean, he just turned 21 on, I think it was February 7th. It's crazy when you see him in training. He just looks and feels and behaves himself like a guy who's been in the league for 10 years. And you speak to Samuel Piet about him, and he says, yeah, people listen to him. He's not a Roy Keane type of captain who's going to start shouting at people right, left, and center. But when he does speak, and again, he's only 21, people listen. And that just shows you how much esteem everybody has for him and his potential.
Last question for you, Ollie, and to steal one of Dubsy's favorite expressions, what is the ceiling for this team this season? Is there a ceiling? Can they go and do something pretty special?
Did you start a side gig as painter decorator or something?
Actually, you'd be surprised. I'm doing a lot of painting this week.
Everyone's got a side hustle, Ollie.
Yeah. Well, I have no choice. Too many.
Mine is shoveling, so it's okay.
Mine too.
That's interesting. I think the answer to that, and it's going to be a boring one, but you'll know by the World Cup next year, because I think there's an awful lot of new pieces that came in. You've got new management, but I think you can definitely aim to make the playoffs. I wasn't a huge fan of a single objective at the beginning of the year, which was we want to lift a trophy. I don't think that saying that you're a Canadian champion is enough if you don't make the playoffs or if you finish 13th or whatever. I think that brings up too many questions. You know, does Laurent Courtois come back in 2026 if you're a Canadian champion? You hit your objective, but then you're second to last in the league. So I think they're definitely in the mix again to at the very least play the play-in, hopefully have it at home. But if you manage to do anything above that, it's because your recruiting really, really paid off. And that, with the new management only being in place a few months, would be a huge success for CF Montreal.
Is there one player in that squad right now that you want to keep an eye on this season, thinking this could be a breakout season for this player?
That's a good question. I don't think it's a breakout season. I think, like, to me, 2023 for Natan Saliba was discovery. He confirmed last year he was able to take more responsibility, because while players were gone to Copa America, while players were injured, he really took on an awful lot of minutes and was used in a ton of roles that were slightly different, and he always answered the call. So I think that was the green light for the club, especially, and for himself. We can give him more responsibilities. Now it's dominating. I think that this year is the one where you could see Saliba just playing a match and you're going, okay, like he's head and shoulders above other players, and being able to do it consistently. If I was him, his counsel, his agent, maybe Laurent Courtois as well, without putting too much pressure rather on a 21-year-old, and say, if you do that, you're gone to Europe. Like, that's the key. That's what everybody's looking for. And to me, he's 100 physically, mentally. His work ethic is incredible. He listens. He's very, very coachable. So he's got everything to be able to make that leap this season.
An intriguing season for sure, all beginning this weekend against Atlanta. Ollie, where can our listeners and viewers hear more from you this season?
Well, I'll be doing the commentary on 14 of the matches CF Montreal are playing on RDS. I'll be doing other MLS matches as well. And I've got a podcast going that's called Au Fond des Filets. And if you guys have any bit of French, this morning I just published an exclusive interview with Samuel Piet. I got a chance to speak about his contract, and he's one of the most fascinating guys to talk contract, money, marketing with, because he's very, very open. So I was delighted to be able to get that chat with him in Orlando, and it's online since this morning. You
can't see it because I think my name's in the way, but I have him in my little pickle jar of heads somewhere around here, but you can't quite see it. So you're big fans of Sammy Piet.
Basically, what I'm telling you is, with his new contract, just make sure he gets a bit more visibility now.
Yeah.
Steve Davis,
second tier
snooker champions, in trouble now up here, so I might put Sam Piet there. Ollie, thanks so much, mate. Enjoy this weekend, and we'll chat to you really soon.
Have a nice one.